to join us, and I think more people will come in. So I'm just going to start by welcoming everyone to Divorceify's December webinar. My name is Tracy Shevin. I'm very proud co-founder of Divorceify, along with my two other co-founders, Sonia Kuralt and Tali Koss. The three of us are all attorneys who have worked in family law. I myself left divorce litigation a number of years ago to found my own practice in family mediation. So I help people resolve divorces out of court. I myself, as you can see, I'm a working mom in quarantine. That's some art from my 3-year-old who's been decorating my office diligently over the last several months. I'm very excited to be here today with Tracy Ross, who is a member of Divorceify's professional community. Tracy has been in practice for over 25 years as a couples counselor. She works with couples in all phases of their relationship, including pre-marriage and post-divorce. In addition to couples and family therapy, Tracy's specialties include parenting, discernment counseling, and collaborative divorce. Tracy has a private practice in the West Village of New York City, and for the past 10 years, she's also worked as a faculty member on the Resilient Families and Special Needs Kids Project at the Ackerman Institute for the Family. In that capacity, she works with families, designs and delivers workshops, and runs groups for families and professionals. Tracy is a licensed clinical social worker, an organizational psychologist, certified discernment counselor, and collaborative divorce coach. She completed her postgraduate training at the Ackerman Institute for Family and Couples at the Ackerman Institute's Family and Couples Externship Program, and she lives in New York City with her family. Although I believe she's tuning in from California right now.
Yes, I'm on the West Coast right now.
Thank you so much, Tracy, for joining us. I'm really excited for today's webinar because Tracy is a very skilled counselor in discernment counseling, which is a topic I think we could all really learn a lot more about. Discernment counseling, just to give a very brief introduction before I turn it over to Tracy, is discernment counseling is a process that helps clarify the direction for your relationship. So when one person in a relationship is sort of leaning out and thinking that the marriage is over and headed for divorce, but the other person is still leaning in and still invested and trying to save the marriage, it's very likely that as a couple, you'll be experiencing a standstill and really feeling stuck in moving forward. So discernment counseling is a really short-term, goal-oriented process that helps couples decide on a path for moving forward, whether that's together or apart. So if you have any questions that pop up along the way as we talk to Tracy about this, you can submit them in the chat, and I will do my best to get through those questions at the end of our 30 minutes with Tracy. And Tracy, I want to just thank you again for joining us. And before we get started, is there anything else you want to tell the audience about yourself or your professional experience?
Hi, everyone. Very excited to be here and speaking to all of you. I just want to add that my personal reasons for getting involved in this kind of work has to do with my own parents' divorce and messy custody battle when I was young, and sort of made me curious and committed to finding out if there was a better way to have that happen. And there definitely is a better way, and there are ways that this can go very differently and have a very different impact on kids. So that's my personal background.
Thank you so much for sharing that. It's always nice to hear people's personal connection to their work. So Tracy, could you just start by telling us a little bit of the overall concept of discernment counseling?
So, a lot of couples are stuck in choosing a direction for their marriage. And when they contact me for discernment counseling, what I hear is we can't make a decision. We don't know if we're going to stay together or split up. One person is what we call the leaning in. One is leaning out, thinking the marriage is probably over, but not sure. The other person really wants to work on it, and they don't know what to do. And they've often been through a few rounds of couples therapy. Maybe they've even consulted with lawyers, and they can't make a decision. And what used to happen in the past is couples would go for therapy and nothing would happen, because it wasn't spoken that they weren't really sure on a direction. So, it's really hard to make progress in couples therapy if you don't have a clear joint goal. So
that's a lot of sense.
Yeah.
As a divorce lawyer, in my experience, I've had both sides of I've had but let's see, there's three main ways you can get a client. One of you both, your client and their spouse, they're both on the same page. They want a divorce, and it's really about just getting it done. And it can be painful. It can be, a variety of levels of long or conflicted, but they both agree they want the divorce. Then there's sometimes I get a client who is like, I want a divorce, but my spouse isn't there yet, and I don't know what to do. How long can I be stuck in this marriage? Other times I've gotten a client who is somebody who says, like, I really want to save my marriage, but it seems like I have no choice and I have to go through with this divorce. So I'm guessing that all three of those couples could benefit from discernment counseling. So can we just talk through like what that looks like if you approach it in different ways?
Yes. So the first one is when they both want to get divorced, but maybe they're not 100% sure, or maybe there are just some things that they want to talk through so that they're sure they're making the right decision, so they don't have any regret. And the beautiful thing about discernment counseling is it gives each person a space to, in a non-blaming, non-shaming way, look at their own contribution to where their marriage ended up. And, if it's a safe space to do that, that's very freeing for people, however they choose to move on. Now, when I get the call from the leaning in person, which is the most common, I want to save this marriage, my husband, wife, partner doesn't, but they're not 100% sure. They don't want to do another round of couples therapy to work on these issues because it hasn't worked, but they're not sure they're out. Well, then there's a space to work. Then we can look at what's in the way of working on the marriage. So when I tell these couples that we're not going to work on the issues, we're just going to talk about what they are, then all of a sudden a lot of the barriers go down.
Yeah.
Like, it's kind of a relief. We're just sketching out a roadmap, how you got here, what it would take, but we're not doing it. This is 1 to 5 sessions. That's it. And they don't even have to commit to all 5. You commit to one, and then you decide at the end of that one if you want a second one.
Right.
And I just want to say, just what happens in a discernment counseling session is that I spend some time with the couple together and some time with each person separately.
Oh, that's interesting. How does that work?
It works really well because, a big part of this is for each person to look at their own part in how the marriage got to where it is. And it's really hard to do that with your spouse in the room because you're afraid they're going to start piling on. Oh yeah. And what about this that you did and that you did and this, but in the space without them, like I ask people, what's the part of you that you're going to bring to whatever relationship you're in the future? If this marriage doesn't work out, what do you want to work on in yourself? How do you want to be a better partner? And that's a very powerful conversation.
Yeah.
It's a really great thing to be able to do. And it really takes the heat off.
So when you say it's 1 to 5 sessions, like what happens what's the arc of the 5 sessions, I guess?
Well, the first session is pretty much like, how'd you get here? What happened in your marriage that got you here? What was the best your marriage ever was? And how did you get to this place? And why are you still fighting to save it? Is it because of your kids? Is it something else? Is it because you really want to, you're just not sure how to do it? So we're kind of identifying where we are. And then the next couple, the middle sessions are all about identifying a lot of that time gets spent in the individual time, maybe very little couple time,
Right.
Looking at what do I have to do to work on this marriage? And am I willing to do that? Can I do that? And then the last session or the end is, okay, let's pick a direction, and what's that direction going to look like? So it doesn't mean if you decide to work on your marriage, it doesn't mean you're going to stay together. It just means you're taking a pause. You're going to work on it for 6 months, and we're going to lay out what that working on it looks like. And it's not the blaming, shaming, you need to change, you need to change, you need to change. It's not that. It's really not that.
Yeah.
Conversation, non-starter.
I guess a lot of it is actually about accepting the other person and figuring out how to work together.
Accepting the other person and accepting that you have a part in it, right?
Yeah, right.
It's really easy to point a finger, and if you can't look at yourself, then it's really hard to move forward. And I also want to say that, couples who come for discernment counseling, sometimes they really do want to work on the marriage, but they're feeling so hopeless because whatever they've tried hasn't worked. And so, that's also really important to note. Like maybe it's, I don't know, communication, intimacy, and they haven't been able to address it, or there's a long list of things, but that comes out as well. And I also think it's important to mention discernment counseling is not for situations where there's like active abuse,
Mhm.
active affairs, active addiction. Like
Right.
it's not to fix those things or to get your partner to please change that so we can save our marriage, right? Like that's
Right.
not what this process does. So it's
Right.
not for everyone.
Got it. And have you seen various outcomes?
Yes, yes. All the outcomes. I mean, the one thing that everyone comes in saying is we don't want to stay stuck. We can't
Right.
stand the
Can't
decision
do this anymore. Yeah.
So I won't say that people 100% of the time get unstuck, but I'd say 95% of the time. But yes, I've seen many couples decide to work on it
Got
because
it.
now they have a roadmap, and now they have a way, they have some knowledge and they feel kind of empowered. I've also seen couples decide to split up, but it makes it feel less hostile. The
Mhm.
animosity is lower because you've kind of done this process to look at how we got here, how we're hurting each other, and when you take responsibility, then you can kind of let go and move on and say, you know what, let's really do this the best way possible. So I've seen all the outcomes.
As a lawyer, when I'm dealing with the leaning out spouse as my client and they have their spouse on the other, with the other lawyer who really is still trying to work on the marriage, it can be really difficult for the process of getting the divorce. Obviously, if you have one person who's really trying to keep the other person in the marriage or keep pulling them back into the marriage. And it can really frustrate the overall process. And when there's a request for couples counseling in that situation, I often advise my client, you should do it, even if you don't want to save your marriage. So, if you are on the receiving end of a request for discernment counseling as the leaning out spouse, why might you say yes to the process?
As the leaning out
Yeah,
spouse.
as the leaning out spouse.
Yeah, because it's gonna help your spouse let go, maybe,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah,
And I think a lot of divorce stays contentious because people can't let go of the relationship. So at least that tension, that fighting back and forth is a way to stay engaged. And it kind of allows you to let go, even though it will allow the leaning in person. It's painful. It kind of the anger can be replaced by sadness and grief,
yeah,
and I think that's also a gift to yourself and your children.
for
um,
sure.
so I think the leaning out spouse has a lot to be gained from this.
Right.
And
And once there's an acceptance that this is actually happening and both people feel like they've been heard, in my experience as the lawyer, it really helps move the process forward in a more efficient way.
I'm really glad you said that.
Yeah.
Both people feeling like they've been heard, right?
Yeah.
Because so much happens in divorce where people don't feel like they're being heard, so they just
Right.
up the ante. And
Right.
this is really a space. I don't let people do in my office what they do at home or what they do through their lawyers, and I make that very clear from the
Yeah.
beginning. Your relationship is my client, not
Right.
spouse A, not spouse B. What's best for your relationship? That's what I'm, attending to. So.
Right. That makes so much sense.
Mhm.
So, in the typical discernment counseling session, you start with a couple together, and then you might have some breakout sessions where you just speak to them individually, and then you bring them back together at the end of a session.
Yes.
And is
I
there
Go
Please
ahead.
go ahead. No, please go ahead.
I'm sorry. At the end of the session, a lot of what happens at that end of the session together is telling their spouse, this is what I need to work on. This
Right.
is what I identify. And that just kind of allows people to breathe.
So is there homework in between sessions often?
Homework is a tricky thing because people often want it, but then they don't do it, and then they feel bad that they don't do it. So
Mhm.
the homework is just to really try to focus on yourself
Yeah.
and what you need to do to work on this relationship, to take it off of the blame part and turn the lens around to yourself in a non-shaming way, because every
Right.
relationship is co-created, right? Like there's no couple that gets to be where they are
Right.
just because of one person.
Right. And, for people who are in the audience who are just wondering, like, I've already started down the road of divorce, but I'm still not sure that this is the right thing for our family, for my marriage. Maybe it will be one day, or maybe we can make this work. Is there ever a point where it's like too late to do this?
No. I mean, no, absolutely not. Even if the decision kind of you're 90% sure,
Right.
there's still something about processing it.
Right.
Like I have so many couples who say we've never spoken about this stuff, and it just the speaking about it and hearing each other changes it. And most couples who come for discernment counseling have kids,
Right.
really care about how this is impacting their kids. And if this is going to make you better co-parents, which you're going to be forever, then there's value. And we're talking about 5 sessions,
Well,
one to 5 sessions.
that's actually a great point, is just the impact it can have on your co-parenting relationship.
Yes. Yes.
There's a lot in being discussed, I think, in mainstream media these days about having the good divorce, right? Is having an amicable divorce, have it be a peaceful process, have it be all about your children, not about you. And, I think that while there's a lot of value to that messaging, and I myself am, left litigation to become a mediator, so that sort of a process is very close to my heart. I also know it's not for everybody, right? And we all have to accept the relationship we're in and make the best of it for ourselves. Meaning, if you are in a dysfunctional, distrustful marriage and you want to end it, and you're not going to be able to do an amicable process, that is okay, right? I've also told people that you can be angry and still mediate. Can you be angry and still do discernment counseling?
You can absolutely be angry. Yes, you can absolutely be angry, but you can't be, you know, harming each other
Right, of
out
course.
to hurt each other, out to get each other. You can't use
Yes.
this process for that. It's a great place to process anger, and anger makes sense, and
Right.
it's a natural thing to feel, and it's appropriate in a lot of
Right.
situations. So this gives people a way to process anger in a less destructive way. But absolutely, you're right. There are some situations that are not suitable for these sort of things.
Of
We're
course.
trying for the good divorce, but there's a difference between not being able to do divorce well because you don't have the roadmap, the tools, the way to do it, and just not being able to do it well, right? So that's
I actually think discernment counseling can be a bridge into a better divorce. I mean, you might start feeling like, I can't speak to this person at all. I can't communicate with you at all. We're on totally different planets. But discernment counseling can be a discrete goal-oriented process you do before you really get into the weeds of your divorce, or even in the middle of it, to say, let's press pause and like reset how we're communicating about this.
yeah.
And, then if you establish a better dynamic in this goal-oriented process, and then you return to your divorce process, you might be able to have either a more amicable process or even just maybe a more efficient process. So I think that for people in the audience who are thinking, well, this might not be for me because I can't even sit in the same room with somebody, actually, it's great. You start together, you get your private time with the counselor, you come back together. It can be a really constructive way to move from, point A to point B, even if you're not getting along right now, you don't want to get back together, it can be still really valuable, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. And that's why you want to see someone who has experience, because like
Right.
if I'm sitting in a room with a couple and it's just too heated and there's too much animosity in the room, it's going to be destructive. I'll just start the individual sessions sooner, you
Sure.
know, see it, got it, okay. Um,
Sure.
and so, yeah, you have to, it definitely, because it's intense.
Yes.
Doing a
And you are also do divorce work, right? You
Yeah.
also do collaborative divorce work. Can you tell us a little bit about what collaborative divorce work is?
So collaborative divorce is a divorce where you want to collaborate, right? You want to work things out without litigation. You want to come to agreements without the fighting, without the lawyer letters, and you want to sit down and really hammer out in the best way possible what your divorce is going to look like. So I don't do the financial piece. I do the mental health piece of figuring out how to parent together, how to be together in the world post divorce, how to disentangle your lives from each other. A lot of what I do is what parenting looks like.
Right.
How do you make decisions together? How do you make changes? How do you address things that come up as parents and really support each other in the best interest of the child? And that's where what I mentioned at the beginning about my personal experience. I mean, I have such a strong belief in keeping the adult stuff out of the kids and not putting the kids into the middle of it, which most couples don't intend to do, but it can kind of happen inadvertently. So collaborative divorce is a way to sort of, keep that clean, because kids don't need that. It's hard
Right.
enough for kids, right?
That makes sense. So at the end of a discernment counseling process, if you decide to stay together, that might be the beginning of 6 months of, can you elaborate on, you said earlier?
Yeah. So in discernment counseling, there's 3 outcomes. Path 1 is just staying in the no man's land and the indecision, because that's always an option. Path 2 is
Right.
moving towards divorce.
Right.
And path 3 is 6-month all-out effort to work on your marriage with divorce off the table. So just for those 6 months, divorce is off the table.
Got it.
And what is that effort going to look like? Probably couples counseling, maybe some individual counseling. It's different for each person, but we kind of lay out a contract, and in the couples counseling, these are the things that need to be worked on. Because remember, we're not working on them during discernment, we're just identifying them. So these are the issues that you really have to address. And a lot of couples will say, we've never really tried to address this, or we really haven't known how. And so these are the things that we're going to really look at. So then we have we have a roadmap. We have kind of a clear path as to what's going to be worked on. And I'm kind of amazed sometimes at, from the first session to the 5th session, that couples decide they really do want to give it a try. And then if it doesn't work, then you can sort of move on in a different way.
Right.
But a lot of, if it's we just are so, there's this hopelessness that we just don't know how to do it. So, and it's just too raw. So let's just split up and blow the whole thing up. And in those situations, discernment counseling can really, really have an impact.
I also hear a lot from clients, like, I want to make sure I did everything I could to save this marriage or to make it work for my kids. And is this, would you say this really fits into that, of like making sure you've done everything you can?
100%.
Yeah.
Right? Especially for the leaning out person. A lot of times that leaning out person might be pretty sure they don't want to stay in the marriage, but they don't want to feel that guilt. What if they regret it down the road?
Right.
What if they find out they could have worked it out with this person? What if their kids say, you didn't try years later?
Right.
So this is that last ditch effort. And
have you ever helped people figure out how to tell their children that they're getting a divorce at the end of the process?
I do that a lot. And that's a very painful conversation.
Yeah.
And it's kind of the thing that couples always dread the most. Like, it's the hump, and I coach couples through that. And we go through what they're going to say, what they're going to do, when they're going to do it, what they're going to do after they have the conversation. And we anticipate the different reactions the kids may have, and then talk about what it's going to be like for the next week, 2 weeks, because it's not just one conversation.
Right.
But yeah.
I think and I'm sure it varies depending on the ages of the children, and
really varies, but couples feel better when they're like over prepared for that.
Yeah, of course. Of course. Yeah. So do you ever bring kids in for a session to have them be part of it, so they can tell them in your space, or do you never do that?
I've not done that. No. I've met with kids like after, as part of family therapy.
Sure. Yeah.
Post-divorce, post-separation, but I do not bring them in to my office for that. No, that's a personal family kind of, people remember the conversation when their parents told them they were splitting up. Always.
Right.
So
right.
You want to be really careful about that.
About how you do it. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I'm sure, I can tell you that that's the number 2 most searched for piece of information, or as it's reported to us by our clients, is the number 1 thing is the various ways to get divorced. And the number 2 thing is, how do I tell my children? So I know that getting help with that is something people really want. And, discernment counseling, what it really is it's a goal-oriented process, right? And maybe the goal of the process for you as a couple is to, figure out what your co-parenting relationship is going to look like, confront the end of your marriage. How do we get here? Acknowledge it, figure out how to move forward in a healthy way for your children, and then figure out how to tell them this is what's happening with our family, right?
Absolutely. All of those things in a short time. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So if you're the leaning in spouse and you're trying to pitch this to your leaning out spouse, you might even frame it, as I want to really deal with what's going on in a thoughtful way for the sake of our kids.
Yes, absolutely. And I like to speak with each person before I meet with them. So that's part of the pitch too.
Yeah.
Just talk to me and I will explain the process to you, and I'll explain to you what it is, what it isn't. And that really, I think there's something popping up.
Yes, I got that. Someone has to leave early because their kid's school is shutting down midday. So just another day in the pandemic,
But that's a really good point. I want to speak to the leaning in and the leaning out before
that makes sense.
Before I meet with them. And I want to screen for, like I said, abuse and active substance.
Right. Of course. Okay. So, before we let you go, thank you so much for your time. I know you're based in New York City typically. How do you work with clients? Do you do virtual sessions? Is it all in person? How does it work?
Right now it's virtual. It used to be all in person, but right now it's virtual, and hopefully I'll be back in person in the spring, maybe, who knows. But
while you're virtual, would you take couples that aren't based in New York?
Absolutely. I have already all over the country, which is great actually. And, for some couples, it's actually a relief to not be in the same space and do this. It really is. So I've been working with couples. They're either not in the same city or just not in the same place when they do the sessions. And they find that it's like kind of eliminates a barrier to doing this.
That makes so much sense to me, actually.
And it's fine. It's really fine. It won't surprise you, or probably anyone listening, that there has been an increase in requests for discernment counseling in the last months. It's like a very noticeable one. So
I'm not surprised at all. I'm not surprised at all. Do you think that the quarantine life has, had a positive impact for couples, negative impact for couples? What have you been seeing trending in your practice?
I'm seeing things kind of are at the surface that when you don't have this busy life, you're running around and doing things, there are fewer distractions, and it's harder to ignore what's going on in your marriage. So I'm seeing, on the positive, more people saying we have to pay attention to this. Like, it makes us realize we can't ignore this anymore. We have time to ignore it. And like I said, the barrier to entry sort of for couples therapy and family therapy is lower. There's something about the virtual nature, or just like, wow, we're at home, we have to deal with this. That's making people more open to therapy. So it's bringing things out that were there already, but kind of highlighting them.
Right. And to the professionals in our community, I want to point out Tracy's a great resource for your clients. And, if you have a leaning in spouse as your client or a leaning out spouse, and you find that the mismatch between those two things is really preventing things from moving forward, Tracy can be a really great resource to point your clients to as a way to get past that impasse and really start to move things forward.
Yeah, I'm happy to speak with anyone who's listening if they have any questions, or, email me, contact me through my website. And
when I email out the recording of this webinar, I will include all of Tracy's contact information. But in case somebody cannot wait until that email, how can they get in touch with you, Tracy?
My website is tracyrossnyc.com, and my email is tracy@tracyrossnyc.com. So you can find me. Just Google me. Yeah.
Wonderful. Tracy, thank you. I'm sure a lot of people are very grateful for this information, and I will be emailing out the recording to everybody, and so many more people will benefit from it as well.
Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you. Have a great day.
You too.
Bye.
Bye.